You know what's strange about the psychology industry? We've spent 30 years writing books about boomers. We dissect millennials in every other podcast. We study Gen Z like there's a grant for it, like they're a fascinating new species that requires full academic attention. But there's this entire generation sitting right in the middle, born somewhere between the mid-60s and the early 80s, that nobody built a curriculum around, nobody worried about, nobody really studied. They just grew up, quietly, while everyone was looking somewhere else. They were the first large-scale generation of latchkey kids. Parents working, key under the mat, television on. No one managing their emotional development after school because there was no one home to do it. They watched the evening news without a filter. They learned what foreclosure looked like, what unemployment looked like, what a world that wasn't designed for children looked like alone. At 12, on a Tuesday afternoon. No buffer. No mediation. Just the world, early, raw, and unsupervised. Historians William Strauss and Neil Howe, in their landmark study of American generational patterns, described this cohort as the most self-reliant generation of the 20th century. Not because they were built for it, because they had no alternative. They adapted. And then slowly, without announcing it, they stopped waiting for someone to notice. Here's the first thing people get wrong about them. People describe this generation as emotionally unavailable, closed off, hard to reach. They don't process things out loud. They don't call you when something goes wrong. They handle it, and then they appear the next day, fine, always fine, even when something clearly happened. And that reputation is not entirely wrong. They are contained, relative to what came after. But here's what that actually is. Research from the University of Michigan tracking children who spent regular, unsupervised time between ages 8 and 14 found something consistent. Those kids developed significantly stronger internal regulation systems. They learned to manage distress without external scaffolding because the scaffolding wasn't there. Nobody came home at 4 p.m. to ask how the day went. Nobody noticed the bad day. So they learned to process it alone, file it, and continue. What you're reading as emotional unavailability is what developmental psychology calls self-regulation. It's one of the hardest psychological capacities to build. Most people don't get there. This generation had it trained into them before they were old enough to name it. They also don't perform their accomplishments. They don't post much, don't announce things, don't need witnesses for what they finish. In an attention economy where visibility became its own form of credibility, where sharing the process became as important as the result, they show up to the table and simply do the work. No broadcast, no update, done. Which makes them look, in 2024, like they're either arrogant or disengaged. Neither is accurate. Research from Sandra Hofferth at the University of Maryland, tracking self-directed behavior across childhood cohorts, found that kids who developed autonomous routines early, who completed tasks without external reinforcement, built a specific behavioral pattern. They stopped associating completion with acknowledgement. The work ending was the signal, not someone's reaction to it. A man 47, project manager, 15 years at his firm, was asked by a younger colleague why he never shared his team's project wins on the company Slack channel. He looked at her for a second, then said, "The project's done. I don't need a reaction to close it out." She assumed arrogance. He was genuinely confused that the work required an audience to count. That's not personality. That's two completely different operating systems. He didn't know he had one. She'd never encountered before. And here's the deeper layer. People interpret this generation as indifferent, like they've quietly given up on being understood. Some of them have, and it's worth sitting with that honestly before rushing past it. They spent formative years in environments where emotional attunement from adults was inconsistent, where nobody's watching was a literal daily fact, not a metaphor. Dr. Robert Krosno at the University of Texas, in longitudinal research tracking adolescent outcomes into midlife, found that teens who developed autonomous coping strategies early showed significantly higher psychological resilience in their 40s and 50s, but also markedly lower tolerance for performance-based social dynamics. In plain terms, they don't need the room watching. Not because they're above it, because they've already met the version of themselves that exists when nobody's clapping. And that version turned out to be enough to keep going. But I want to stop here and ask you something you might not want to sit with. Is your self-sufficiency real, or is it a wall that got so comfortable you stopped noticing it was still there? Because both look identical from the outside. Both even feel the same for a while. The only difference is, one was a choice made from strength. The other was built at 10 years old to survive a specific set of conditions, and nobody ever told you the conditions changed. Only you know which one it is. If you're a man from this generation, there's a specific layer to this. You were handed a definition of manhood that required you to need nothing and ask for less. Competence was the currency. Silence was the default. You watched the men around you handle things, and you inherited the handling without inheriting the vocabulary for what it cost them. So when younger men look at you now and see someone unreachable, what they're actually seeing is someone who was never given a map for the terrain they keep asking you to navigate alongside them. Follow for more on the psychology of quiet intensity if this is the first time any of this has had a name. And this is where the title finally makes sense. Stopped needing you to notice doesn't mean they stopped caring about connection. It means they outgrew the version of themselves that required external confirmation to feel like they existed. Strauss and Howe's research identified this as the defining psychological signature of this cohort. Not cynicism, not giving up, but a recalibration so deep it looks, from the outside, like they were never interested to begin with. They were. They just stopped waiting at the door. Here's what nobody writes think pieces about. When you genuinely stop needing someone to notice, not as performance, not as stoic posturing, but as actual fact, something changes in how you move through rooms. You're not invisible anymore. You're just uncapturable. And the people worth knowing can tell the difference. Some things don't need to be noticed to hold everything up. Which sign hit closest to home? The containment, the attention thing, or the question I asked you to sit with? Drop it in the comments. And if someone in your life grew up this way, always fine, in a way that felt like more than fine, send this to them. Sometimes just having a name for it changes something.